Hi Not Board Gamers and welcome back to Not Board Gaming. I'm your host, I'm Mark. Now in today's video we're going to be looking at potentially the most anticipated game this year. Certainly may not have the biggest release of any game with loads of fanfare, but it's certainly the game that possibly more people want to get their hands on than any other game. Now in America, you've had access to this for maybe a month or 8 weeks or so, because it was a Target exclusive. Our friends in Canada are just starting to receive copies now, but over here in the UK, it's the 11th of August. I don't think it gets released for about another month here. Of course, I am talking about Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion, designed by Isaac Childres, published by Cephalofair Games. So, in the big daddy box of Gloomhaven, you have this huge, sprawling, legacy-style campaign adventure which takes place over 90-odd and more scenarios because it's a branching narrative with various unlockable legacy components, unlockable characters, unlockable cards. You rip cards up, you open certain booklets and certain envelopes at times. It's this massive, massive experience, and as you can see from the picture up there, the box of Gloomhaven plus my storage solution absolutely dwarves Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. You see, if you're going to go ahead with the main box of Gloomhaven, there is a fairly big commitment, or a number of fairly big commitments that you've got to make. First of all, there's the cost. It's not an inexpensive game to buy. Secondly, you have to have a place to store it. And thirdly, you're going to have to devote the amount of time to play it as well, with 90-odd scenarios in the full campaign. Each scenario lasting anywhere from, 60 minutes to 120 minutes. That's a lot of gameplay, as well as the well-noted setup and teardown time. Look, with the modular maps or the modular boards, each scenario has a different map structure. There's lots of things to set up in the main game of Gloomhaven, so that can be a little bit daunting for a lot of people. So in a stroke of absolute genius, what Isaac Childres and the guys at Cephalofair Games decided to do is release a streamlined kind of introduction into the world of Gloomhaven. It's a far smaller experience. It gets rid of some of the core concepts. Most of the legacy stuff is gone. There are no modular maps, and we'll come on to how that works shortly in this. And it's a more linear campaign there. There are no real unlockable characters in this as well. So it's a far more streamlined version, but however, it does potentially make it more accessible to people. So I suppose the purpose of this video and the point of this discussion is Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion the right game for me? First of all, if I've already got Gloomhaven, and secondly, if I haven't got Gloomhaven but I've always been scared by it and interested in it, is Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion worth it for me? So, you want to hear my thoughts on that? Let's watch the video. So unless you've been living under some kind of board gaming rock for the last few years, you will know a little bit about Gloomhaven. You see, Gloomhaven, people think that Gloomhaven is this big dungeon crawler, this big epic dungeon crawler, and in reality, Gloomhaven is a puzzle game set in some dungeon scenarios. You see, first of all, there are no dice in Gloomhaven, none whatsoever. Everything that you do, every movement that you take, every action that you take, every action that the bad guys take, and movement that they make is going to be dictated by a series of cards. You see, each character that you get in Gloomhaven is going to accumulate a number of cards, which they will then choose a maximum number to play with on each scenario. So each character has a hand limit on there. And if we look at these cards absolutely dictate what you're going to do. So here we have the cards for Hatchet, and you can see each card is separated into two parts. That's because each round you will choose 2 cards, and there's a number on there. With the lower the number, the better the initiative, the higher the chance the person who's got going first in the round, basically. But let's not worry about initiative really, because let's talk about the cards themselves. And you will choose the top action on one card and the bottom action on another card. Yeah, I said bottom action. That is possibly going to be mentioned a few times here. You see, because each player, each and every round, will choose 2 cards and play a top action on one card and a bottom action on another card, or vice versa on there. And those actions are mainly going to be a move and an attack action. There are additional actions. You may have a heal action on there, or you may have some kind of shield action on there, but in reality most moves are going to be most turns are going to be a move and an attack action. And you see, and that's it, and that's why it's a puzzle game, because Gloomhaven gives you a finite number of decreasing resources each scenario, and you have to try and work them to your advantage to complete the goals, i.e. complete the puzzle on each scenario. No, it's not, you're going to say. Gloomhaven's a dungeon crawler. You know, there's a reason it's the #1 game on BGG for most of forever, is because it's a dungeon crawler. Nobody would put a puzzle game at #1 on BGG, and that's the clever thing about Gloomhaven, is it actually wears many different hats, and it's a really involving game. But at its heart, it is a puzzle game. Do not get away from the fact that it is a puzzle game. Everything you do is on a timer. Your hand of cards that you've got at any one particular go, on any one particular round, is a decreasing timer. Each round you're going to lose access to one of those cards. You will get some of them back, but not every one of them back. You will lose 1 or 2 of those cards on each refresh, and that's what it does. That creates the timer for the game, and the puzzle is working out what you've got in your hand, or if you're playing solo, you will be controlling 2 characters, what you've got in both hands, and how you can actually work those cards together to complete the puzzle of the objectives of whatever it is that you're trying to do. So that could be, as I say, killing all the bad guys on the board, or maybe destroying some obstacles, or maybe killing a big bad. But do not get away from the fact that Gloomhaven, despite everything else, is a really tight puzzle game. And when I say tight, pretty much like the shot, I mean really, really, really tight. You see, I have won and lost scenarios on pretty much the last card turn of that particular game, and that's happened a number of times when I've played both Gloomhaven and in some of the latter stages I've just played in Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. It really can come down to being such a tightly scripted puzzle that there is very, very, very little margin for error. However, I'm not really here to talk about the ins and outs and the ups and downs of Gloomhaven, the big box experience, because it has been around for quite a few years now, and there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of videos out there where you can go and watch somebody be far more eloquent and far more in-depth than I am, tell you everything you need to know about Gloomhaven. We're here to discuss the genesis of Gloomhaven, and that is not Frosthaven, which is obviously the big box sequel, which is just finished on Kickstarter. It is Jaws of the Lion. Does Jaws of the Lion need to exist? And to actually answer that question, I think you've got to go back to this whole relationship that people have with Gloomhaven, me included. Now, I'm not saying that Jaws of the Lion was produced purely because of my thoughts on Gloomhaven, because I never really spoke about my thoughts on Gloomhaven. I'm sure that Isaac Childres really couldn't give 2 shiny shits on my thoughts on Gloomhaven. However, you see, I have a bit of a complex relationship with Gloomhaven, and I know I'm not alone. You see, Big Box Gloomhaven, I think, for me and for quite a few other people, is almost the epitome of the board game version of it's not you, it's me. I, like many other people, you know, I got excited by Gloomhaven, and I thought it would be a game that I would buy and I would play, and it would be the only game I would need to play. I had visions in my head that I would, you know, sit down and I would have the game permanently out and I would play this long campaign. In reality, over a year later, I've maybe played 11 scenarios, and that doesn't mean I've played it more or less every month. What I'm saying there is I've probably had it out, played 2 or 3 scenarios, then put it away and not got it out for a few months. You see, Gloomhaven wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And that's what I mean by it's not you, it's me, Gloomhaven. You see, like many other people, I thought that Gloomhaven was going to be this big, intricate dungeon crawler, which was going to allow me to open up this box of wonder and progressively open up this box of wonder and have a full, true legacy experience. But after 11 scenarios, I haven't even kind of retired a character yet. There are certain, you know, quite a few things I haven't done. I think I've only opened 1 secret envelope so far. I haven't really grabbed that full experience yet because it hasn't fully grabbed me as a game, and I do think a lot of that comes down to my perception of what I thought that Gloomhaven, the experience that Gloomhaven was going to give me. Gloomhaven didn't lie. It doesn't try to be anything else. You read the description and you look at everything out there and it tells you exactly what Gloomhaven is. I still thought it was going to be a different experience to the one that I got when I opened the box and started playing it. The first scenarios were fantastic, and then obviously it started getting more difficult. And then I realised that, you know, maybe by 6 or 7 scenarios, I'd forgotten some of the rules, or maybe I'd misinterpreted some of the rules. Maybe I'd done this learned behaviour thing where I was playing parts of the game a little bit wrong because I hadn't interpreted the rules correctly, and I got myself into a bit of a pickle. And then what this meant is that kind of all of a sudden, this big sprawling game that I paid like over £100 for, I'd spent hours punching and sorting and invested a serious amount of time in the game, wasn't giving me the experience that I thought it was going to be. New games came along and new games got played more, and Gloomhaven got left a little bit in the lurch, which is a real shame because obviously there are a lot of people out there who also knew exactly what Gloomhaven was, and it delivered exactly what they wanted it to deliver. But unfortunately, I got myself into this rut. You know, the part of it is my fault. Part of it is Gloomhaven's fault. So I've admitted to my fault, which we know I expected Gloomhaven to be something that it clearly isn't and never was going to be, and didn't even dress itself up as that. There was just an expectation there. However, Gloomhaven has to hold its hand up and say, do you know what? Big Box Gloomhaven, our rule book isn't the best. We don't really so much ease you into this experience. What we're just going to do is throw you this wonderfully big, massive game, overwhelm you with the fact that you're going to get legacy components. You've got 90 odd scenarios to run through, and here's all of the rules in one fell swoop, and that happens with Big Box Gloomhaven. Now, people better than me and smarter than me obviously worked out what the rules should be, etc. But sometimes you don't know what you're playing wrong, and that, I think, is potentially the issue with Big Box Gloomhaven, is that all gamers make sometimes assumed errors and this kind of learned errors on some of the rules, and we continue playing because it feels like it's okay, or we forget about certain minor little rules, and that certainly happened to me with Gloomhaven. And I think part of the reason I wasn't enjoying that experience of Gloomhaven is because I hadn't quite got all the rules down, and you don't really go back and totally reread a rule book. I certainly don't, not many times anyway. But it just felt like the experience was missing and lacking something for me. I didn't get why a lot of people kind of love the game. Don't get me wrong, there are people out there like me who kind of think it's okay, and then there are a lot of people who are quite ambivalent about the game and genuinely don't like the game, like you are with any game. But for me, it just wasn't working, and therefore it kept getting consigned back into my Kallax. Then along comes Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion. We'll not talk about Forgotten Circles, we'll just talk about Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion. And what Isaac, Childres and the guys at Cephalofair done here is almost a stroke of genius. I think they understand that a lot of people are dissuaded from having the full Gloomhaven experience or even buying Gloomhaven because it's quite an imposing beast, and those rules are kind of choppy, and depending where you are in your your board game journey life, if it's a relatively early game, you're probably going to get lost in it. It's going to seem a little bit too overwhelming. So, out of the shadows, almost out of nowhere, with kind of very little preamble, just a few months' notice that it was coming there, Isaac and the guys at Cephalofair release Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion. And what's the line in one of the Dark Knight films? It might not be the hero that we need, but it's definitely the hero that we deserve. And almost in one fell swoop, what Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion does is answers and kind of negates some, not all, but some of the problems that people have with Gloomhaven. First of all, there's the cost investment. Gloomhaven itself, the big box, £120, say, for the big box. I think Jaws of the Lion is going to retail at around about £40. It makes it more accessible there. It strips out a lot of the legacy. In fact, most of the legacy is gone. There's a few unlockable boxes in there, but like 4 unlockable boxes. But other than that, legacy is gone from Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. A lot of people have issues with legacy games. They don't want to spend £120 and end up ripping up cards and things like that. There's the rules, and we'll come on to the rules in a moment. And as I mentioned earlier, that is a huge part in Gloomhaven. If you get the rules wrong and you've got this perceived idea of the rules, then it can really ruin your enjoyment of the game. Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion drip feeds you the rules, increasing in scope over the first 5 scenarios, which is utterly fantastic. And then, of course, one of the big things for people about Gloomhaven, the big box, is the setup and teardown time. No matter what you do, if you've got an organizer, fantastic, well done, you're still going to spend a lot of time finding the right kind of modular tiles, setting them up, getting all your tokens out, blah, 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 blah. You see, Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion cleverly overcomes some of that problem. So the game comes with 4 new playable characters, and these are in the form of the Quattrel Demolitionist, Hatchet, Void Warden, and the Red Guard. Now, I'm not spoiling anything by telling you about these 4 new characters because the information about them is pretty much out there in the public domain. However, I'm not going to tell you what each one does. Rest assured, each one has their own abilities, etc. I'll let you find out for yourself. But unlike the Big Daddy game of Gloomhaven, there's no retiring of characters. So generally the characters that you start with in Jaws of the Lion are the characters that you're going to finish the kind of 25 scenario campaign with at the same time. However, you can of course mix them, you can add characters to the campaign if you want to as well. And if you're a solo player, then you're going to play with a minimum of 2 characters. But trust me, they do kind of change how you play the game because they've got their individual cards. And the great thing about this is that you can absolutely transpose these characters across into the main game of Gloomhaven. There are also a host of baddies as well, and these will come in the form of some you'll recognise and some that you won't. And as you can see here, I've got the Zealot with its various kind of strengths on there, front and back, and I've also got a Chaos Demon as well there. But there are a number of baddies that come with the game. Some of them have training cards for you to use in the early scenarios. So that's good. These also adds an element of kind of something a little bit different, and you get this mix and match of varied bad guys as you're playing through the various scenarios in Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. However, on top of the baddies and the characters come the tokens. Now, if I'm going to take you back to my picture of Gloomhaven, you can see my storage solution there for all the various tokens, because the big box of Gloomhaven comes with a lot of things that you need to pull out on various maps. In Jaws of the Lion, everything comes in this little tray here. That's right, it has a tray and you put everything in here, from your hit markers to your coins to your kind of effect markers to some traps and some other boulders, etc. Everything token-wise fits in one little tray, and I think that's a really good and neat idea, because a big part of Gloomhaven is getting the right tokens out for any particular scenario, and Jaws of the Lion does all that by stripping it back down to the bare essentials. However, that's not the only clever thing it does. You see, a bugbear, it's not just a Gloomhaven villain. I don't think there are any bugbears in Gloomhaven, but people have bugbears about Gloomhaven. One of the big ones is setting up the modular boards for each and every scenario, because they're different. They're wildly different throughout this kind of 90-odd scenario campaign that you're going to play. And because they are different, the big game requires a lot of these double-sided modular board pieces. And these, you know, they take some time to find the right ones, because they've only got a tiny little identifier in the corner, as you can see there, and each map requires a number of them to create as you go along. Now, in a stroke of absolute genius, what the guys at Cephalofair have done is they've put all of the maps into this wonderful kind of ring-bound book, and you can see that, there you go, you have no modular boards to set up, because the maps that you're going to be using are going to take place on 2 or 3 pages of this book. 3 pages? How does that work? Well, you see, along with the main map book, you also get a supplemental map book as well, and sometimes this is just kind of winning conditions, but on other occasions, like on scenario 3 here, what you will do is you will put that together, and you can see that you've got a larger map to play on there. So that's a really, really neat idea, which cuts down on a massive amount of the setup time that's involved in Gloomhaven, the big game, because everything can be laid out on these 2 or 3 pages. However, it doesn't come without a sacrifice, though. You see, in the main game of Gloomhaven, here we have, I don't know, scenario 12 here, and it's got the layout of scenario 12. And it tells you which map tiles are needed. So what you can do is effectively pull those out and only pull together the first map tile, which is this one up here. And therefore you only put the baddies in there, and every time you open a door, you then look at the next particular page, you find out what map tile needs to go on, and you put the baddies accordingly, and that creates a huge element of surprise in the main game. By adopting this model in Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, all of the information is kind of on the page for you. You know, you can't really avoid it. Yes, you will not set some maps up or some rooms up until you kind of go into them, but still that information is there. So there's the kind of the loss of potentially an element of surprise. You can potentially start planning what your moves are going to be, maybe a room or two ahead, because the information is there. Now I'm sure there's ways to mask and kind of hide that information, but it can take away an element of surprise. So that's not the end of the world. You see, Jaws of the Lion is a little bit of give and take. Here we're going to give you this more accessible way of playing Gloomhaven and a speedier way of setting it up, but we're going to take from you an element of surprise, because you can't have both, and that's okay. As long as you know that going in, and there are ways to kind of mitigate that loss of surprise, then, you know, you're still going to have an absolutely fantastic time if you enjoy the game of Gloomhaven. However, I really, really, really want to caveat this speedy setup time. You see, setup time is relative, and everybody's saying, oh God, it makes it so much easier and so much faster to set up. And it does when compared to the full game of Gloomhaven, where a particular scenario may take 15 or 20 minutes to set up. So Jaws of the Lion, by presenting everything on the book for you, is still, you know, it obviously streamlines that experience, but do not go into Jaws of the Lion thinking that within 2 or 3 minutes you're going to have all the relevant contents out of the box and everything set up on the table. There is still a huge amount of setup in Jaws of the Lion. It's faster than the Big Daddy box of Gloomhaven, but there's still a lot of setup. You've got to obviously put the maps out, you've got to find the right baddies, you've got to, you know, find the right standees for them, you've got to get their cards out, you've got to understand what baddies are coming later in the game, maybe you've got to set up the tokens on there, you've got to set up your players and the, you know, the items they bought from the shops and their various cards. Look, there's still a lot of setup in this game, so do not be fooled into thinking that this is a real quick fire way of kind of accessing Gloomhaven. It's quicker in relation to the main game, and I think you really need to keep that in mind. However, we've not really got to the true stroke of genius yet in Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. The real stroke of genius is in how they've laid out the rules in Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. Right, so here is my tired, dog-eared, battered Gloomhaven rulebook with all its 50-odd pages of rules and examples and icons and everything that you're more or less from game one expected to know to play the big box version of Gloomhaven. There's just a few pages at the back which are all about leveling up and retiring characters, but the rest of it you kind of need to know the ins and outs of before you start playing Gloomhaven. And the problem with going through a 50-page book for a game that's quite complex and involved in Gloomhaven is that not everything that you read is going to happen in every scenario, so you will find yourself kind of either skipping rules, flipping past rules, having to flip back, misinterpreting rules, and that's what I spoke about earlier. I think, you know, at 10, 11 games into Gloomhaven, I was certainly suffering from a kind of assumed knowledge syndrome, where I thought some of the rules I was playing were correct, and in reality they probably weren't, and that's hindered my enjoyment of Gloomhaven. However, do not fear. You see, what they've done in another stroke of genius, and following in the footsteps, if you like, of Fantasy Flight, is in Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, you're going to get 2 books. You're going to get a Learn to Play book, which is there, and you're also going to get a glossary. That comes in really useful because, as I mentioned, no matter how many rules you learn and how well you are learning rules, you will always forget things. And this is great because the glossary is laid out in alphabetical order, and it literally tells you everything that you need to know about any questions that you will have on playing Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. and most of Gloomhaven as well. However, the real stroke of genius is this learn to play tutorial. So as I say, a la Fantasy Fight, you get 2 books, and this learn to play tutorial is absolutely fantastic. It takes you through the first 5 scenarios, and it drip feeds you the rules each and every scenario. So in scenario 1, you're playing and your bad guys don't have kind of movement decks or modifier decks. Then they're introduced in scenario 2, and other items are introduced in scenario 2, and it starts to build up this knowledge, things like leveling up, like using perks, like buying items from the shop. You don't need them in the first couple of scenarios, so you're not given those rules in the first couple of scenarios, and it starts to create a really nice flow in learning how to play Gloomhaven. And the first 5 scenarios get progressively more difficult as you're not only adding more rules, but as the game is aware that you know more about how to play Gloomhaven, so it starts to make it more difficult. And trust me, scenario 4, that was for me a scenario that I beat on the very last card turn of the particular scenario. One of my party had become exhausted. My other party had 1 card turn left, and then that was it. They would have been exhausted themselves, and they managed to defeat the last bad guy. And I think that's absolutely fantastic. And I put a question out on Facebook: is Gloomhaven too tightly scripted? And maybe I always thought that with the big box version of the game, because I was trying to remember all the rules, but this wonderful way of learning the kind of drip feeding of the rules over the first 5 scenarios is just fantastic. I never felt completely out of my depth. If I did something that didn't maximize it, that was down to me making a bad choice, not down to not remembering rules, which is what's happened in the big game of Gloomhaven. And you see, and I think that's an absolutely fantastic thing. You see, what it's done by stripping away some of the extraneous stuff that is unnecessary and not needed in Jaws of the Lion, things like retiring characters and the umpteen unlockables that you have in the big box game. It gets rid of those completely. They're not in this particular game, and it concentrates on the core function of how to play Gloomhaven. This drip feeding over the first 5 scenarios makes it perfectly ideal for anybody that's never played Gloomhaven before, because it's a great training module, if you like, on how to play Gloomhaven over the first 5 scenarios. After those first 5 scenarios, that's it. The rulebook is done there. You've got the glossary to refer back to, but you're left on your own, and the chapters start to open up and you start to see a little bit of branching going on. But it teaches you in a great way how to play Gloomhaven as a real added bonus. So as a huge added bonus for somebody like me, it's retaught me how to play Gloomhaven in a really, really, really structured way. It's reinvigorated me with how to play Gloomhaven. I'm suddenly excited again about how to play Gloomhaven, because I feel like I actually know how to play it properly now. Now, the problem obviously with being a solo player is that when you read through the rules and then you play the game on your own, there's generally nobody else to say, ooh, you might have done that a little bit wrong. And as a solo player, we may understand sometimes that a game feels broken and talk about big potentially missed rules, but the little ones that we might have just misinterpreted or got a bit wrong each time, there's nobody there to pick up on that. Suddenly, by reading through this wonderful flow of information, this drip-fed rules over the first 5 scenarios, I feel like I've suddenly relearned how to play Gloomhaven. I've got a fire in my belly about Gloomhaven once again, and I'm really enjoying the fact that, this big puzzler, dungeon crawler, card-driven game without any dice that offers a wealth of storytelling possibilities, it's there for me again. It's there for my taking again. And Jaws of the Lion truly excites me. Not about finishing the rest of the campaign on Jaws of the Lion, but then taking my knowledge, moving that over to the big box game of Gloomhaven. So it's working really hard at kind of fixing a lot of the potential issues that were there with the big box of Gloomhaven. It's making it easier to access, easier to set up, easier to learn how to play the game, easier to understand the complex mechanisms in the game. It's doing all of that. It's providing a decent storage solution in the box. Still not ideal, but a decent storage solution in the box. However, it still maintains potentially one of the biggest flaws in Gloomhaven, and that's the storytelling. You see, in the big box game, if you haven't played it for a while, because it's got this branching narrative, yes, there is a main quest, but it kind of meanders a little bit, and you may go off on a side quest and do this, that, and the other. you don't feel like you're actually part of a big overarching story in the big box of Gloomhaven. You know, there's too many branching narratives. There are too many ways that you can go and come back and try another scenario that you may have failed before. It just, you know, the story's almost an irrelevance. You know, if it was there as a, I know they call it a campaign, but a campaign for me should create this kind of feeling of joined interconnection between one scenario and another. And in Gloomhaven, yeah, there is a link, but for me, it's really a little bit missing. So they have the opportunity with Jaws of the Lion to really create this wonderfully capturing story. This is something that tells this wonderful tale that makes you want to play the next scenario because you want to complete the next part of the story. And it doesn't, unfortunately not. The story is, I'm going to be honest with you, I've played 6 scenarios now. I couldn't really tell you what the story is. It's something about this Jaws of the Lion, this group of people who are going out there and doing this adventure. For whatever reason, it becomes irrelevant, and it's a real weak part of the game. And that's a shame. Because if there was the connection there between each and every scenario, you would feel more engagement with it. Don't get me wrong, it's still a fantastic game. And I'm enjoying moving from one scenario to the next, because I want to see my characters progress and get stronger, and I want to find out what I can do from the puzzle perspective, how I can work these cards to my advantage. I want to face different baddies that test me more, or baddies that are stronger because my skills are getting better, and I want to move from one story to the next to do that. But I don't want to do it for the sake of the story, because it's almost an irrelevance. And I think that, if I could proffer one piece of advice to Isaac and to the guys at Cephalofair Games, is the story is just, it's weak. It's weak. It offers no engagement. I'm not bought into the story. It matters not a great deal because the gameplay in Jaws of the Lion and the way it drip feeds you in is so fantastic, but the story is poor. So, final thoughts on Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. Look, the lack of a really interesting and engaging storyline can hurt this game. If you're looking for a deep and immersive experience, this game may not be for you. It retreads the same problems and the same issues that Gloomhaven had, in the fact that the story is just a little bit lackluster. If you think it's going to be a way that you can play Gloomhaven within 5 minutes, or set it up within 5 minutes, then you're going to be severely disappointed, because you're not going to be able to set it up within 5 minutes. The setup and teardown is still quite lengthy, but in relative to Gloomhaven, it's fast. But in comparison to some other games, it's about average basically for a game. So it's not a lightning fast way to play it. And you may kind of be thinking, well, I only get 25 scenarios, and it's half the price of Gloomhaven. I get a third of the scenarios from there. Is it really worth it for me? And I can't answer that for you there. However, at the beginning of the video, I said, hopefully answer 2 questions here. One of them being, should I get this game if I've already got the big box Gloomhaven? And the answer is possibly, depending on what your experience is with Gloomhaven. If it's like mine, that you really like it and you appreciate it, but you feel like you're always missing something, then this could be the antidote to that. This could provide you with that level of solution that you were looking for, and reignite that fire and that energy for the big box of Gloomhaven. And I think that's a fantastic thing. If you're looking to just expand your Gloomhaven experience because you really enjoy playing Gloomhaven, then again, this will work fantastically well. If you don't mind just taking a step back for the first 5 scenarios and playing it with restricted rules, but that's not a bad thing. You're kind of building some characters up from new again. However, if your experience with big box Gloomhaven is that you know all the rules and you've played it and it still doesn't quite do it for you, it's not going to change your mind. It's essentially Gloomhaven, the experience in a streamlined version. And if you don't particularly like the big box experience of Gloomhaven, then this is just more of the same, more or less. So in that instance, then it's probably not going to be the game for you. It's not going to change your mind if you really don't like Gloomhaven. The other question that I said we were going to answer is that, it's for people who are always interested in Gloomhaven but found it a bit daunting, the whole sheer scope, spectacle, size of it. Does this answer the question? And do you know what? I can say unequivocally here, absolutely it does. If you've got an interest in Big Box Gloomhaven, I would say don't go straight for Big Box Gloomhaven. Absolutely go for Jaws of the Lion first, because at £40, it's going to give you enough of a kind of taste of the big box experience of Gloomhaven to find out as to whether you like it or not. And I think that's a fantastic thing. You know, it eases you into the gameplay, absolutely holds your hand on this journey just enough, and then just lets go at the right time to let you find your wings and kind of, you know, make your own mistakes. So if you've always been interested in Gloomhaven but worried about the cost, worried about the investments that are required in terms of time and learning stuff, etc., then this is the absolute antidote to that. You should go out there, you should buy Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. It will help you scratch that itch and maybe get you more engaged and more prepared to buy Big Box Gloomhaven. Thank you, Not Board Gamers, for joining me on this journey through Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. Look, it's, you know, from my mind, I think it's a cracking game. As I say, it's reignited my fire. I'm really pleased to have got this game, despite its kind of flaws and its foibles. And I will be, once I completed this, going back into the main game of Gloomhaven and kind of, you know, continuing with my campaign there, because I now feel like I enjoy playing Gloomhaven. And before I always felt like I should enjoy playing Gloomhaven. So yeah, really appreciate this game coming out. Look, it's about 33 degrees here in the UK. It's really bloody hot. So I apologise for the oodles of sweat coming off me. Look, my name's Mark. This is Not Board Gaming. Do remember that you can always kind of follow us on Facebook or on Instagram, and that's Not Board Gaming, always BORED. Do check out our other videos and subscribe to the channel. And one final thing, if you can't find anybody else to play with, there's nothing wrong with playing with yourselves. Until next time.